This happened back in 2003. I used to work at a Walgreens, and if anybody doesn't know, it's a popular pharmacy store chain that also sells lots of other items. The stores are not that large usually and generally never too busy. Either most of the time, there's a pretty calm feeling inside. The store that I worked at used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure if it still is, but I know that it was when I worked there. So usually, when I was working overnights, I would be all by myself for most of my shift. There really wasn't a need to have anybody else there because I could handle everything, and we never got that many overnight customers. I was also able to walk to and from work, which was very nice. I had an apartment that was just down the street and a couple of blocks over, so it would only take me about 10 minutes usually. I worked 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and it wasn't that late yet when I walked to work and wasn't too early when I walked back. One time when I was working an overnight shift, everything was going normal, and it was about 1 a.m. I remember that I heard the automatic doors opening and glanced over to see a woman entering the store. She appeared to be about 40, her dark brown hair was maybe 5'12" or 5'3" and pretty thin. After entering, the woman looked in my direction and said hi, and I said hi back to her. She then walked down one of the aisles, and I focused my attention elsewhere. I was just standing behind the counter at the checkouts. We only had to check lanes, but most of the time only had one open. Several minutes went by and I occasionally saw the woman, but I wasn't watching her or anything. She just seemed to be shopping normally. But at one point I was just casually looking around and I saw the woman standing like half behind an aisle. She was holding a small video camera. It appeared, and holding it in a way that it looked like she was filming me or taking my picture. I looked at her, wondering what was going on. It was like she was kind of trying to hide it too, because she was about halfway obscured. I found this really strange. After a couple of seconds of this, her camera went down suddenly, and she disappeared behind the aisle. I thought that it was odd, but not the biggest deal. About a minute later, the woman walked up to the left near the exits. She said goodnight to me as she walked out without even buying anything. I said goodnight to her, but was a little bit weirded out by the whole experience. But after she was gone, I quickly forgot about it. I mean, yeah, it was strange that she was filming me or whatever, but it's not the creepiest thing in the world. Hours went by and several more customers came in. All of them were pretty normal. When 6 a.m. arrived, I was off and another co-worker was there. I left Walgreens and then headed back to my apartment by walking along the sidewalk. It was still dark out and things were very quiet. Just the occasional car would pass me by on the road. As I was walking back though, one thing that was a little different was that I heard somebody walking ways behind me. There was footsteps, but a good distance away. I was sort of curious, but didn't look back until I crossed over one block. As I did, I glanced over and the same woman was walking. I found this really strange. After I crossed the street, I crossed another, and then went along that sidewalk. That would take me all the way back to my apartment. I didn't think the woman would do the same, but she did that. When I started to get really creeped out, her whole personality just seemed kind of mysterious, even when she had spoken to me saying hi and bye. The woman continued to walk behind me, but was a long ways back. Soon I reached my apartment. I was really glad to see that she hadn't seemed to gain on me or anything. She was still about the same distance behind. Now you had to use your key to enter the apartment building, and then I had a separate key for my unit. This made me feel better, if I could just get inside. Who knows why this lady was following me, but I knew that she didn't live here. I entered my building and then went up to my apartment, which was on the second floor. My apartment was at the front side of the building, so I could look out onto the street where the woman had been walking. After I got inside, I went to the window and looked out. I saw the woman standing there on the sidewalk. She had her camera out again and was appearing to take a video of me of my window. This was just really strange. I ducked down to get out of her sight. Now, She was just taking a video of my apartment window. What was the point of this? After several minutes I looked again, and she was gone. I went on with my normal routine. After that I would relax after work and eventually fall asleep. Obviously my hours of being awake were very different than most people, with me having to work overnight hours, so I fell asleep that day probably at around 9 o'clock in the morning. Also when I woke up, I remembered that it was almost a PM. That was a little bit earlier than I usually woke up. But then I remember hearing in the sound of somebody trying to open my apartment door. I walked over to the door and then looked through the peephole. What I saw was a woman walking away. I just barely saw her, but it was the same woman from before. I was now extremely creeped out by this. After she left, I didn't know what to do. I watched her leave the building and then walk away down the sidewalk rather quickly. I really don't know how she got in. Probably snuck in as somebody else was leaving, which is very possible. I decided to call the police and tell them everything. They came out to investigate, and I gave them all the information that I could. I didn't really know what else to do. They said they would look into it, and after that I never heard anything more. I also never saw the woman again. It still creeps me out when I think about it obviously. I don't work at Walgreens anymore and haven't for many years. I also don't live in that apartment or even the same city anymore. I still wonder what that woman was doing though. I regrettably used to work at a hotel in our town. Our town had gotten hit by a hurricane a few months back, and a lot of houses were badly damaged, so a lot of people vacated the place. The hotel is about a 20-minute walk from my house. I'll leave out of this, as I really just don't want anything traced back to me. The hotel was a very standard bed and breakfast type place, where they serve wet scrambled eggs, frozen sausages, and assorted cereals. The hotel had a busy month after the hurricane, as some people were out of their houses due to damages. But after a while, things quieted down, if anything quieter than before the hurricane. I always worked nights from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then someone would relieve me at 2 a.m. and they'd work till 10 or 11 a.m. I could always see how many people were checked into the hotel, and at the time it was only maybe 9 rooms, which wasn't a lot at all. I could go the whole night sometimes without seeing anyone. There was a back break room for employees with a coffee machine, fridge table, and a couple sofa-type chairs. The employee bathroom was also back here at night. I spent most of my time back here. There was a bell at the front desk that people would ring if they needed anything. I was in the back when I heard a deep voice from the lobby saying hello. Repeatedly I got up and went through the door leading to behind the counter and saw a man on the other side of the glass. There was a glass barrier with an opening underneath about 10 in high. He said he needed towels. I grabbed him a couple extra towels and slid them under the glass for him. He grabbed them rather aggressively, shot me this weird look, then walked to the room's hallway. I stayed in the lobby, now sitting in the rolling chair by the monitors, and I just watched that man on the camera walk down the hallway. He was looking around weirdly. Then he started rubbing the towels on his face. I said out loud, "What in the world?" Then he got in the elevator, so I went back to the break room. It was maybe 10 minutes later when I heard a voice again from the lobby. It was the same voice. I walked back out, and that man was standing on the other side again. He said very loudly, "My key card is broken." I asked what his room number was. He said it was something random like to see, something with a letter in it. Our hotel room strictly had numbers, no letters, so I knew this man was lying. I told him, "Sir, our rooms don't have letters. Are you sure you're staying here?" His reaction was not something I was expecting, nor was it something I wish I ever had to be victim to. He threw the towels on the floor, started smiling, slightly tilting his head as he got closer to the glass when his face was practically pressed up on the glass. With a smile on his face, I screamed back at him, "I'm calling the police," and I did. I picked up the phone and showed him. As I dialed 911, he kept his disturbing smile. as he now started mocking me, calling the police, as I spoke to the dispatcher on the phone, explaining very loudly what was happening in front of my face. The sick man laughed and headed for the door in a slow walk. I told the dispatcher he was leaving, and when he was gone through the doors and out of sight, I said he was gone. She asked me if I still wanted an officer to show up, and I said no, it's all right. So the next couple hours of my shift went slow. I decided, for obvious reasons, to hang around in the lobby. Now, instead of the break room, there was one guest who checked in during this time at around 2 a.m. My relief came. I clocked out and was free to go home. I walked outside to the parking lot. It was cold out. I remember wishing I brought my coat. I walked with my hands in the pockets of my light jacket and my hood up. Then I heard a voice in the parking lot. I turned around. There was a line of bushes that covered the first floor windows of the hotel. It came from the bushes. I don't know what the voice said. I didn't care. I walked faster now. Once I got out of the parking lot, I was on a main road for a brief minute. But there were no cars on the road in this quiet town at this hour. After a minute, I turned left down a residential street that would eventually turn onto my block. It was dead silent out. Not even the sound of any distant traffic, just the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement, and then the sound of someone else's shoes hitting the pavement behind me. Only it was the sound of someone running, as if on their tiptoes trying to be quiet. By the time I turned around, they stopped. There was a car right behind me, and I almost knew that there was someone hiding behind it. I heard laughing and then a familiar voice saying quietly, I knew it was that man. I looked around, planning out my next move. I couldn't outrun a man, let alone wearing my work shoes. I looked at the nearest house. It had an upstairs light on. Someone was awake. I would go run and ring the doorbell for help. I looked back at the car and I saw him, that man, peeking his eyes out from behind the car as he inched around it to the front. When he got to the hood, the rest of his face and upper body were exposed, and I could see his disgusting crazy smile again. I ran for the house screaming, help me. I made it to the front door and rang the bell at least 3 times, and that's when the man grabbed me and started choking me, whispering in my ear, die in that moment. I thought my life was flashing before my eyes, and then an angel in the form of a man opened the front door to the house and screamed hey at the man choking me. The man's grip was released from my neck and I fell to the floor. I never turned to watch the man run away, but the man from the house helped me up and brought me inside. He gave me water and called the police for me, and I explained the whole story to the police. They collected the CCTV footage of the man from the hotel and put feelers out to track him. I was called into the police station when they did a lineup of people who looked similar to the man on the CCTV footage, and I was asked to point out which man I thought was him. I looked at all 5 of them for like 5 minutes, and I ultimately said it wasn't any of them. I don't know if the pressure and nerves got to me, but in the moment, I truly didn't recognize him to be in that lineup. I hope to this day I didn't make a mistake and let that man roam. A few years back, I was working as an overnight security guard at a company. I don't remember exactly what company it was, but it wasn't that popular or anything. I worked at a lot of different places back then doing security. It was an easy job because I would just sit at a desk all night, literally nothing ever happened. Most shifts I wouldn't even talk to anyone, sometimes 1 or 2 at most. I could just go on my phone and look around and get paid for it. But at this one particular company, it was a pretty standard office building for the most part now. Inside was a lobby, and I would sit at a desk in there and had a computer with some basic information. The building was not really near anything else in particular, and was slightly more secluded. The only other people there overnight was a security guard and a janitor. The other security guard would mostly just be outside, and I knew both him and the janitor, and didn't see them very much other than when I would arrive or leave here, when the janitor cleaned the lobby, when I was working behind the desk. One night I would guess that it was around 1 o'clock in the morning or so as I sat behind the counter. I occasionally would look around. My view was mainly of the front door and window next to it. Outside of that was a parking lot which was empty. Behind the parking lot was a fence. I was just casually looking around when all of a sudden, I saw this guy walk to the door. He looked right inside and faced me. It was really strange to see, because nobody had ever come to the door before. But I then realized that this man, who was standing at the door, was smiling the creepiest smile I had ever seen. His eyes were so wide, like they were about to pop out of the sockets. It was very unsettling. He had to be joking or something. The man did not try to enter the building though. He just stood there at the door and kept staring at me. I wasn't sure what to do, so I waved at him. He did not wave back to me. He then moved out of sight and I couldn't see him anymore. I was really confused by what had just happened. I had no idea where the guy had come from or what exactly he was doing. I tried to brush it off and figured the outside security guard would soon see the guy, so I called him to let him know. But he hadn't seen the guy at all. I got up and walked over to the door, but the guy was now out of sight. I went back to my desk and was there for the next 30 minutes or so. Then the guy was back. I just looked up and there he was standing at the door and staring at me again with the same creepy smile. This time, I got up, but as soon as I stood up, he moved out of sight. I walked over to the door and opened it up. The man was now gone. He must have run off somewhere. I walked around outside until I found the other security guard. I told him about what had happened, and we talked for a while. Neither of us knew where the guy had gone. We looked all around the property after that, but he must have left then. I went back inside. The property was large enough that he could have easily evaded us, and don't ask me why. But there were hardly any security cameras outside. There were a bunch inside, but only like to outside that didn't even cover that much space for the rest of the night. I didn't see him. In fact, I never saw him again. I still wonder who he was and what he was doing.